and welcome back for another Music Theory Bite. In this video, I'm going to be talking about secondary dominant chords, giving you the basics about this very common type of chromatic chord. If that sounds like something you'd like to learn more about, then this is the video for you. So what is a secondary dominant chord? Well, it's a chord that uses chromaticism to tonicize or point towards, give a little bit more direction to, a chord other than tonic in the key. It borrows the idea of the dominant to tonic or 5-1 relationship, but it uses this relationship to point towards a chord or scale degree that's not tonic in the key. It can give you a little bit of motion towards a different chordal area. Secondary dominant chords have three characteristics. First, they all use chromaticism in some way. Second, they all utilize a dominant chord quality. And what I mean by that is, when we have a dominant chord, we expect it to either be a major triad or a dominant seventh chord. So a secondary dominant chord will use the chromaticism to change the chord quality from what it is diatonically into either a major triad or a dominant seventh chord. Third, secondary dominant chords need to have an expected resolution to a chord that is either diatonically major or minor in the key. It can't resolve to a diatonically diminished triad. Now I say expected resolution because in later videos I'll talk about some of the ways that we can use secondary dominant chords in non-standard ways that give you a little bit more of an interesting sound. But for now, let's just stick to the basics. We can think of secondary dominant chords as modifications of standard diatonic chords. What you see in front of you right now is a standard circle of fifths progression, and it sounds like this. If I wanted to tonicize or create a temporary impression of tonal centricity on another scale degree, let's say I wanted to do that to the dominant, then I could use a secondary dominant. And I could figure out how to do that in two ways. The first way is to take the goal tone or the goal chord, in this case it's the dominant scale degree or the dominant chord, and pretend that it is a new tonic, that I'm in that key. So then what I want to do is I want to figure out in this pretend key what the dominant chord would be. Since my original key is D major, my pretend dominant needs to be the dominant in the key of the dominant of D major. So my dominant in D major is an A. I need to pretend that I'm in the key of A major while I'm writing the dominant for this 5 chord. So I think about that for a second. My dominant in the key of A major is an E major triad or E dominant 7th chord. So I would precede my 5 chord with an E dominant 7th chord or dominant triad, and I would label it not as a 2 chord, which is in the key of D, but since I have that chromaticism in there and I want to show that it's acting as a dominant to my dominant, I'm going to label it as a 5 of 5. And I could put the inversional symbol on that 5 if it were in an inversion. The second way to think about these things is as chromatically altered cousins to their diatonic partners. Let's see how that works. So let's start by thinking of that circle of fifths progression again. If we want to tonicize one of the chords in the circle of fifths progression, we find the chord that we want to tonicize, we'll do the 5 chord again, and we look at the chord that immediately precedes it in the circle of fifths progression. What we need to do is change the quality of that chord from what it is diatonically to either a major triad or a dominant 7th chord. Notice how what we're doing is we're creating a new leading tone to the tonicized scale degree. Since we're tonicizing the dominant chord built on scale degree 5, we're going to create a new leading tone by raising scale degree 4. So a sharp 4 put in a normal 2 chord will create a 5 of 5. Now we figure out how to write these things that way, and when we resolve them, they resolve exactly as any dominant 7th chord would. We just have to keep in mind that we are resolving it as if we were in the pretend key of the tonicized note. So for example, we see this 5 of 5 leading to an A major triad. You can check out my video on resolving dominant 7th chords if you need a little refresher on this. We find that pretend leading tone In this case, it's going to be a G sharp, the third of the chord. We find the chord seventh, if there is one, and that resolves down by step. We find the pretend scale degree 2, in this case the fifth of the chord, or B, and that resolves down. And then the last tone, the pretend scale degree 5, will either leap to scale degree 5 if it's in the bass, or stay on that scale degree 5 if it's in another voice. So we resolve the dominant seventh, or dominant triad, as we normally would any dominant chord. And again, we label it as a 5 of 5. Thinking about secondary dominants in the second way helps you to know when you can use a particular secondary dominant, because they essentially are chromatic alterations to the diatonic cousin that they replace. For example, I can use a 5 of 5 in any progression where I would ordinarily use its diatonic cousin, the supertonic or 2 chord. So in this case, it's a modified predominant chord. Anywhere where I could use a 2 chord, I could substitute a 5 of 5 chord. So we can use it in two ways. We can either substitute the chord directly for its diatonic cousin, or frequently a composer, to increase the musical intensity, will first present the diatonic version of the chord, followed by its chromatic cousin, so in this case a 2 chord, leading to a 5 of 5 chord, leading to the 5 chord, which then takes us home to the 1 chord. And that sounds like this. Let's take a look at all the possible secondary dominants that we could have in the major mode. Taking a look at the circle of fifths progression, let's work backwards. First, if we wanted to tonicize the 1, we really can't have a 5 of 1 as a secondary dominant, because it's already a primary dominant. It's already a 5 leading to a 1. So there's no modifications that could take place that could make it more intensely leading to that 1 chord. 1 is already tonicized because it's already tonic. We've already done the 5 of 5, which is a modification of the supertonic or 2 chord. And we did this by creating a raised scale degree 4, a new leading tone to scale degree 5. If we back up one more chord, we can create a 5 of 2 by modifying the 6 chord, either through raising scale degree 1 or raising scale degree 1 and adding a 7th to the chord. Notice again how we are creating a new leading tone to the tonicized scale degree. A sharp 1 is a leading tone to scale degree 2, and that sounds like this. We can create a 5 of 6 by raising scale degree 5 in the mediant triad or 3 chord to change its quality from minor to major, and again possibly adding a 7th. Again, this is adding a new leading tone, creating a new leading tone by raising the third of the chord, changing the chord quality from minor to major, and that new leading tone is leading to our tonicized scale degree. Sharp 5 wants to lead to 6, and that sounds like this. We can create a 5 of 3 by raising scale degrees 2 and 4 in the leading tone triad, or also adding the 7th. We have to change 2 scale degrees in this one because the chord diatonically starts out diminished and we need to change it into a major triad. So we need to raise both the third, that's our new pretend leading tone, and the 5th, which becomes our new pretend scale degree 2. Whenever you have a diminished triad and you're turning it into a secondary dominant, you're looking for 2 scale degrees to modify. And that one sounds like this. We can't create a 5 of 7 because, if we take a look back at our 3 characteristics of secondary dominants, the secondary dominant must tonicize a chord that is diatonically major or minor in the home key. The 7 chord or leading tone triad is diminished, so it cannot take a secondary dominant. We cannot modify that 4 chord to turn it into a secondary dominant to lead to our 7 chord. We can, however, create a 5 of 4 by modifying the 1 chord. Notice, however, that our 1 chord is already a major triad, so there's no modifications we can put on it in order to turn it into a major triad. It already is one. So the way that we create a 5 of 4 is by adding the minor 7th to the tonic chord, creating a dominant 7th chord. Notice also how this is the only example in the major mode of creating a secondary dominant that doesn't use raising chromaticism. This uses lowering chromaticism. Instead of creating a new leading tone to the tonicized scale degree, we have to create a new scale degree 4, or the 7th of the dominant 7th chord that leads to that new scale degree. In the minor mode, the possibilities change just a little bit. We still can't do a 5 of 1 because that's already a primary dominant. We can do a 5 of 5 by raising scale degrees 4 and 6, changing the chord from diminished to major. Again, when you start with a diminished triad, you need to modify 2 scale degrees. And then, of course, we can possibly add a 7th to it. And that sounds like this. Remembering that our secondary dominants have to lead to either a major or minor chord diatonically in the key. That means that we cannot modify our 6th chord to become a 5 of 2 because our diatonic 2 chord in the minor mode is a diminished triad. Moving backwards another chord, we can create a 5 of 6 by modifying our 3 chord. Now remember that our 3 chord is already a major triad in the minor mode, so we're not going to be able to do it simply by adding a new leading tone. We already have that half step between the 3rd of the 3 chord leading to the root of the 6th chord. That is 5 to 6 is already a half step. So we need to do it by adding a 7th to the chord, which in this case is a lowered 2, the 7th of that dominant 7th sound. And that sounds like this. Backing up one more chord, we can create a 5 of 3, but you'll notice we don't need a chromatic note to do that. Or do we? Many people consider the leading tone, the raised leading tone, which we have to add into the minor mode, as being the diatonic scale degree in the minor mode. In this case, by not adding that leading tone, by retaining the lowered scale degree 7, even though we don't have to put an accidental on it, some people view that as a chromatic note which points us towards our 3 chord. So if we didn't have the 7th on there, it would just be a normal 3 triad, a 7 chord, which would be modified into a 5 of 3. We can put the 7th on there to create a 5/7 of 3, and that sounds like this. Backing up another chord, because this 7 chord is a major chord and not a diminished chord, we can create a 5 of 7 by raising scale degree 6 on the 4 chord and possibly adding a 7th to it. And that sounds like this. And then we can also create a 5 of 4. The 1 chord in the minor mode is a minor triad. We can make it major by raising the 3rd and possibly adding a 7th, and that creates a sound of a 5 of 4, which we can use to replace a 1 chord if we want to extend a phrase. And that sounds like this. So these are the most standard ways of writing and resolving these chords. When doing analysis, what we need to look for are the 3 characteristics of secondary dominant chords. First, do you see chromaticism? Second, does that chromaticism create a dominant chord quality, a major triad or a dominant 7th chord? And third, would that dominant 7th chord or dominant triad resolve to a triad that is either major or minor in the key? Notice I say it's an expected resolution because in some cases these secondary dominants will be written in such a way that they will resolve to an unexpected place, but I'll deal with that in a different video. Well, that does it for this video. If you found it helpful, as always, please like it. Feel free to leave constructive comments below, and make sure you subscribe to my channel for the latest music theory bites as they become available. Until next time.